What's going on, guys? I'm Chris and this is Regular Guy Training. So you'll notice that there was a lack of a big fancy intro showcasing the product on display in our thumbnail. And that's because it didn't friggin' get that far. Now, before I go over all the reasons why this is a giant hunk of garbage, first thing that we're gonna do is cover some ad time. Today's video is sponsored by the Sonoran Desert Institute. Have you ever thought about making a living in the firearms industry? If you enjoy gun repair, ballistics, learning about firearms, the Sonoran Desert Institute might just be a good fit for you. To find out more about SDI, visit sdi.edu. Use the link in the description down below or call 480-999-4767 today. And now back to the video. So, bit of a story that wraps itself around these magazines, and it's kind of a tragic one too. These two magazines are owned by two different people. This one is owned by Gio, this one is owned by Brian. They both came out to the same course at the same time and were actually bought at the same time as well. Gio was very interested to see if whether or not this thing worked because it was a translucent magazine that should be being produced by a reputable company. And Brian was more or less just kind of using Gio to see if the magazine itself actually worked. They both decided to bring these out to a 5-day small unit tactics course that I was teaching in Mississippi in October. A couple of unique things about this individual course was not only was it in an area that had some pretty difficult terrain for machines to work on, because the lanes that we were shooting on had to have had Roundup or something sprayed on them that was just not diluted at all, because absolutely nothing was growing ever in these lanes, and nothing has grown in these lanes for the years and years that I have gone there. The other part of this too is that the vast majority of the shooting that they would be doing is at night. They would be learning their patrolling stuff and a whole bunch of other things during the day, but at night was where most of the shooting was happening. This is unique in and of itself because it's October in Mississippi, and there was a lot of humidity going on at night during cooler temperatures, actually kind of cold temperatures, which meant that we had a lot of dense fog to deal with, and most of the time that we were there, it got pretty hard to see at night. A lot of times you couldn't see further than 60 yards, and on many occasions you couldn't see further than 30 yards, and that's with night vision down and all that other stuff. So this does a couple of things that the original P-Mags were actually made for, and that's deal with inhospitable desert type ground with enough moisture in the air to actually make this stuff stick. This makes really good equipment occasionally stutter, and for equipment that is not up to snuff, it's not going to work at all. With that being said, guess what quit on the first day? It was Gio's magazine that he was trying to use as much as possible and keep as loaded as often as possible. It didn't end up like this after this course. There's a story behind that too, but the kind of failures he was experiencing were frankly pretty obvious at this point. He was getting a lot of fail to feed, he was getting a lot of followers sticking, the dimensions of the magazine were just moving around entirely too much, shifting the double stack of ammunition that was in the magazine itself and creating a lot of different problems, to the point where Brian saw enough of this, decided at the first opportunity that he got to get this thing unloaded via drills and whatnot, he would just bag the thing and never use it again. This magazine never got through 400 rounds of this particular course. Considering where it came from, that is a friggin' issue. I posted a short on this channel a while back of me showcasing exactly how soft this magazine body really is by doing something like so and then pressing on the feed lips, really kind of showcasing that it's really soft and way too bendy for what it is. And I got a lot of uninformed comments in the comments section, a lot of people trying to simp for Magpul as well, saying that bendy boys are better because they resist shock. And the interesting thing about that is we figured out what bendy really meant forever ago. Even the guys that are using translucent magazines also know what too bendy is, and that is the reason for the metal skirt around this thing. It was to reinforce things and make them sturdier in places that were absolutely required, and that would be the path of least resistance for all of your ammunition to try and escape. So if you intended on one round to be fed at a time, it probably helps to have the proper reinforcement in the proper places. And if you couldn't use a more stout polymer, for instance if you were trying to do a translucent magazine that worked, you had to use some sort of metal skirt. Magpul decided that they were going to do their own thing and create a magazine that is softer than baby shit. That's a real issue. But before we talk about how soft its magazine body is, let's talk about about why this is the way that this is. As you can probably tell, this follower is looking pretty jank, and the reason why it's looking pretty jank is because it's missing something. If you look at the front end of this magazine, you'll see two dark lines in the very center of it. You'll also notice that one of these two magazines has a dark line that is a little bit shorter than the other. And the reason why it is a little bit shorter than the other is because we are missing a portion of its follower guide. Now here's how we got to this place in time. Post this 5-day course, and after he figured out that this magazine wasn't going to work anymore, he decided that he was going to sit here and mess with this a little bit, because he already knew that it was so friggin' soft that you could just hold the follower back without that much effort whatsoever. But he did want to check and see how little pressure was required to stop the follower cold. Releasing pressure slowly to figure out exactly how much you needed to stop the follower, and eventually as you do that, the follower is going to get released and it's going to kind of slap into its follower guide. No big deal. Until he heard something hit the ground, and that would be this guy. So this magazine is never going to work anymore. Before I get people jumping in the comments trying to create a thesis on why that was an unrealistic test, if you are actually ever in an austere environment, it doesn't matter what magazines you have. It's happened with these, it's happened with GI magazines, it's happened with Lancers, it's happened to me under all these sets of circumstances. If you get enough crap in your equipment, eventually you're going to get a follower that's stick, and it doesn't want to feed ammunition at that exact moment in time. What you do when you get the chance to, when you're not doing other stuff, is you grab this thing, you hear the extra bullets rattling around in it, and the first thing that you do is you start smacking the base plate on this thing to try and jostle enough crap free so that the follower just kind of jumps back into place and the ammunition that's in there is finally ready to be fed, or at the very least unloaded from this guy, and then you proceed with your day. No big deal. Eventually you just clean the magazine out and everything works again. So that's not really an unrealistic test, because anytime that sort of thing happens, it's significantly further down or significantly heavier loaded as far as pressure on this, because once that follower jabs itself back into place, it's also carrying the weight of all the ammunition that's following it. Having just the follower do this, because all he did was push this down the equivalent of 5 rounds and slowly let up on the follower until it quit friggin' working. Having that happen under such little stress is frankly pathetic. And not only is it pathetic, you have even more issues, because knowing now that the polymer is this soft, what are we doing including this? I already do everything in my power to avoid using Gen 3 P-Mags that look like this guy for anything that takes real serious use, because I don't know what I am going to do under actual stress strength if I have to jab a magazine into a gun. I don't know if I'm going to do something dumb and slap a magazine into a rifle with an open bolt, even though, yeah, you absolutely shouldn't do that. And the thing is that the reason why that's a concern is that it's happened to me, and I've seen it happen to other people. Even if there is an over-insertion prevention tab on the magazine, it can still be done. It's still a pretty thin piece of polymer, and when it does break and the magazine does over-insert into the lower receiver, good luck getting that thing out that doesn't require 2 additional people and something to beat the rifle on so you can get this friggin' magazine loose. And what's even worse than that is the polymer here is stupidly soft, and now I've got a perfect little thing to tack weld itself into my lower receiver. God, you guys make great choices. Knowing that I have one of these magazines that still works because it was barely used, because he refused to use it, because he saw what happened to the one that was next to him, I asked for both of them just because I wanted to see what happened to Geo's magazine, and I wanted to do stuff to this one before this ever made its way into one of my guns and me actually do the shooting part with it. I wanted to do a couple of drop tests to see what was what. Here's my thing about drop tests. I hate people that do drop tests with magazines and then get upset when rifle ammunition takes the path of least resistance, especially when it's dropped on the floor plate. This doesn't have that much of an effect on a brand new magazine, especially one of these guys. It does in fact though happen to really affect any actually used magazine by people that like to go outside and breathe fresh air. It doesn't matter what you've got, good magazine or whatever. If it's used, if it's well used, and you drop that magazine, it is very likely that you're going to lose a round or two, because that's just how this stuff works. When you start to wear in a box that holds bullets and is covered constantly under spring tension, you're gonna have a little bit of weakness there, and there's nothing wrong with it at all. It will continue to feed the gun just fine. It's not a real problem. However, if you drop a magazine and it starts to cause all sorts of additional issues, that's what I'm looking at more than anything else. And what I mean by that is this: if I start dropping a magazine, and when I drop it, I see really crazy things happening to its insides, where I see the double stack trying to single stack, or the double stack trying to come out of line or start getting really shifty, or if I start seeing a lot of air in there, or if I start seeing a whole lot of the second round trying to pull itself out of the magazine along with the first round and taking everything offline, that actually tells me something very important, is that the magazine hull is not rigid enough to deal with long-term high volume use and be loaded for long periods of time. In other words, it's not ready to do what a magazine is supposed to do, because all that's going to result in over time is a magazine that, under the slightest bit of inconvenience, and that would include exterior stuff getting in it or being loaded for long periods of time, or in some cases really severe temperature changes, that just results in this magazine sort of doing whatever it wants versus feeding my gun. And I have never seen a magazine that would have results like this after a drop test and then continue to work, because I've seen that out of Tapco magazines, I've seen that out of Pro magazines, and both of those brands of magazines suck so hard that most people don't even know what they are anymore. And other magazines that are terrible, I have seen this in Magpul AK mags too, regardless of variety, which anyone that actually runs AKs well versus pretending like they do can back me up on, because I have on many different occasions seen a improved Magpul AK magazine with steel reinforcements in exactly the wrong places, or at the very least not including the most important place, and that would be the feed lips on a rock and lock friggin' magazine, simply crack apart, because that's how feed lips work when they're not actually reinforced. And it's even more hilarious when I see a student with an AK and one of these magazines at a class fire around, and I see a spent case along with a live round both get ejected from that E-port at the same time. It's befuddling. So when I see that same sort of performance out of a magazine that is capable of doing this nonsense, I have no faith in it whatsoever. And as a note, by the way, I did drop testing on this guy too, and I was significantly harsher on it, because I didn't just hold it at chest height and drop it. I flung this thing around a bit, and I also dropped it right on its feed lips. And the funny part is, during the side body impacts, and especially during the floor plate impact, yeah, it lost a round. During the floor plate impact, it lost 2. But I didn't see the rest of the magazine's cargo trying to offload itself spontaneously, because the feed lips are not peeling themselves apart like a friggin' banana. And in addition to this, dropping it straight on its feed lips actually netted something kind of weird and something I didn't expect. I didn't lose a round at all, and the rounds didn't even come unseated from the very rear, which is strange, but almost as if God himself was like, nah, we're gonna flip these people off. The Lancer performed better in every metric. And we're not just talking a stupid drop test, we're talking about 6 years of hard use between 18 different magazines, and at this point, I'm pretty sure it's well established I do a little bit of shooting here and there. So with all this information on how to make a proper translucent magazine, it's absolutely stunning that Magpul would turn out this kind of trash. And honestly though, I'm gonna take that back, because no, it's not stunning at all, because their response to how crappy these things are is to respond to how you hand load them by adding the tiniest amount of reinforcement just after the feed lips, so that your experience with hand loading them is just a little bit more pleasant. Which is absolute nonsense, because look, some people are gonna try and tell me that yeah, they could stiffen up the polymer for this translucent magazine, and you know what? Again, we figured out, yeah, there are polymers or thermoplastics that you can just keep translucent that are, in some cases, stronger than steel at the same thickness. But what we've also figured out forever ago is that if you tried to put that into a rifle magazine, it would be prohibitively expensive. Again, it's almost like someone figured this out well over a decade ago and did all the work for you. So with the understanding that you can't ignore if you're Magpul core or what's left of the old Magpul Industries at this point, because they're descending down a road of madness that I'll cover in next week's episode of whatever this is, there is no possible way that they don't have enough data to make a meaningful change to actually make a solid magazine or just start with one. But of course they had to tell all of these simps at SHOT Show that they wanted to wait just so that they could turn out a product that was just right. Sure, I sure don't believe you, because this ain't it, man. This ain't it. It's never gonna be it either, because it's not like Magpul knows how to learn from their mistakes, especially with modern Magpul. But I think that's enough ranting and madness for one day. I want to cover more on this, and I want to talk about Magpul a lot more, because the more I see from them, the less impressed I am. And frankly, it's kind of like watching a beloved friend start doing a bunch of coke and not stop. So we'll cover that probably next week, because that is probably 30 plus minutes of, honestly, a history lesson and where these guys are going. Regardless to that, look, if you want to come out and train with us, you absolutely can. We are scheduled out to December, and I've got more than a couple of classes I am super excited to teach, but the one I'm the most excited to teach is the one that no one signed up for yet, and that would be the December class, because it is a rifle set in Ohio, and it's precisely because it's gonna be horrendous on human beings. It's really hard to work like that in an actual northern state, and it really shows you what you're made of. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, and if you're a psychopath like I am that likes to go train under difficult conditions, that's ready for you. But we're also going to a bunch of other places this year, so if you're interested in that, come check it out. If you want to support us through Patreon, you absolutely can too, and if you want to get something out of it, $41 a month gets you as much training as you want with us, unless it is a private class or a soft skin vehicle class, for pretty obvious reasons, both logistic and the private class gives you some exclusivity there. If you want to set up a private class, that's pretty easy to do too. My contact information is on the website. If you want to check us out through our social media outlets and everything else, that's really easy to do as well, because the links for all of this are in the description below. So that's all I have today, guys. I'm kind of exhausted as far as talking about this, because the only thing worse than reviewing a truly bad product is dealing with blind fanboys that have no reason to be fanboying, especially with this much evidence right in front of your face. So that's it, guys. Remember, a regular guy's firearm is the last defense against tyranny. Be easy.